From the outside, everything about Daniel and Clara seemed perfect. Daniel was a tall, charming, soft-spoken man with a heart full of ambition. Clara, his wife, was a beautiful, respectful woman from a humble background. They met during NYSC in Abuja and got married 2 years later after Daniel introduced her to his family in Lagos. But the one person who never welcomed Clara with open arms was Daniel's mother, Mrs. Evelyn Johnson. From the very first day Clara stepped into the Johnson household, Evelyn had made up her mind that Clara was not good enough for her only son. Clara wasn't from a rich family. She didn't speak with a polished accent, and worst of all, she was not the daughter of any prominent person Evelyn could boast about to her friends at the Women's Association. But Daniel loved Clara fiercely. He stood by her, defended her, and even rented a separate apartment far away from his mother to give his wife peace. Clara thought things would get better with time. She was wrong. 3 months into their marriage, Clara discovered she was pregnant. It was the happiest day of her life. Daniel was overjoyed, and even Evelyn came to visit with a fake smile plastered on her face. "My dear," Evelyn said, placing her hand on Clara's belly, "I hope this child brings you sense and makes you more useful in this family." Clara smiled weakly, too shocked to reply. The insults were always hidden behind sweet-sounding words. Evelyn had mastered the art of subtle wickedness. Soon the visits became frequent. Evelyn would come uninvited, complain about the house being dirty, even when it was spotless, criticize Clara's cooking, and sometimes whisper cruel things when Daniel wasn't home. One afternoon, while Clara was 5 months pregnant, Evelyn came with her pastor. "She needs deliverance," Evelyn announced. "I saw it in a vision. Clara is the reason why Daniel's business is failing." The pastor began to pray and shout, trying to force Clara to confess to a sin she didn't commit. Daniel returned home in the middle of it and was furious. "Enough, Mama. You cannot treat my wife like this." But Evelyn, shedding crocodile tears, said, "I'm only doing what's best for you, my son. This girl is not your destiny wife." Despite Daniel's support, Clara could feel a wedge beginning to grow between them. Evelyn kept planting seeds of doubt.
"She's lazy. She's disrespectful. She bewitched you."
And then something strange began to happen. Daniel started coming home late. He stopped touching Clara affectionately. He became withdrawn. Clara, broken-hearted, tried to talk to him, but his responses became colder each day.
"Clara, maybe you should go stay with your parents for a while,"
he said one night. Clara's heart sank.
"But why? Did I do something wrong?"
"I just need some space." From the shadows, Evelyn watched with a wicked smile on her lips. Clara packed her things with trembling hands, her eyes swollen from crying. She had never imagined that the man who once promised her forever would ask her to leave, especially not while she was pregnant. As she stepped out of the gate, Evelyn stood at the doorway, arms folded and a smirk on her face.
"I warned you, didn't I?"
Evelyn said coldly.
"Next time, know your level before entering where you don't belong."
Clara didn't reply. She simply walked away, heartbroken, confused, and deeply hurt. She returned to her father's house in Ibadan. Her widowed father, Mr. Benson, welcomed her warmly and took care of her. Clara tried to focus on her unborn child and avoid sinking into depression, but she couldn't stop wondering what had changed in Daniel. Was it really just his mother's manipulation, or was there more? Back in Lagos, Evelyn had more sinister plans. With Clara out of the house, she began bringing a young woman named Vanessa to visit Daniel often. Vanessa was everything Evelyn wanted in a daughter-in-law: polished, well-connected, and most importantly, from the wealthy family. "She's from the Adekunles, you know," Evelyn whispered constantly. "One word from her father, and Daniel's business can rise again." Daniel resisted at first, but the constant pressure from his mother, combined with the emotional distance from Clara, made him vulnerable. Vanessa was sweet, calculated, and always around. Soon, whispers of their relationship began to spread. Clara gave birth to a baby boy, Nathan. Her joy knew no bounds. Despite everything, she hoped the child's birth would soften Daniel's heart. She sent him a message with a photo of the baby, but Daniel didn't reply. A week later, Evelyn showed up at her doorstep in Ibadan. "You think this baby will bring him back?" she hissed. "Let me tell you now, he's moved on. And this child? He will never be accepted into the Johnson family." Clara stood up slowly, her voice calm but firm. "Mrs. Johnson, this child carries your son's blood. Whether you accept him or not, he will rise." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, but Clara had already turned her back on her. That was the last time Clara would ever show her tears to Evelyn. Months passed. Clara, determined to build a life for herself and her child, started a small fashion business online. Using her NYSC savings and some help from her childhood friend, Rita, she began selling ready-to-wear pieces on Instagram. Her talent, combined with her resilience, paid off. Orders began to come in. She stayed focused, prayed fervently, and poured all her love into baby Nathan. Her father remained supportive, often saying, "God doesn't abandon the innocent Clara. Your time will come." And it did. Within a year, Clara's fashion brand, Knitwear, became one of the trending names on social media. 2 years later, Clara received an invitation to a major fashion expo in Lagos. She was to showcase her designs alongside top names in the industry. With a firm heart and God by her side, she returned to Lagos, her head held high. It was at the event that she ran into Daniel. He looked stunned. She looked stunning. Confidence radiated from her. She wore a fitted dress of her own design, and Nathan, now 2 years old, held her hand proudly. Daniel approached her after the event. "Clara, I didn't know you'd be here." She looked at him coldly. "I belong here now." Before Daniel could speak further, Vanessa arrived, holding onto Daniel's arm tightly. Clara smiled politely. "I hope your business is doing better now." Daniel's eyes betrayed guilt. He had missed out on something real, and he knew it. Back home, things were no longer rosy between Daniel and Vanessa. What Evelyn didn't know was that Vanessa was using Daniel to cover a secret affair she had been having with a politician. Daniel had discovered the truth weeks ago, but his pride kept him from walking away. His business had crumbled completely, and Vanessa was no longer interested in a broke man. Evelyn tried to keep up appearances, but everything around her was falling apart. Then one morning, Daniel came home to find Vanessa gone with a note. "I can't continue this lie anymore. You were a rebound, I'm sorry. Daniel sat in the empty living room, staring blankly, his world crumbling. For the first time, he thought of Clara not with anger, but with regret. One rainy evening, there was a knock on Clara's door in Ibadan. Her son Nathan was playing with toys in the sitting room. She opened the door, and there he was. Daniel, drenched, worn, empty. "Clara," he said softly, I made a mistake." She stood still, emotions flooding her chest. But before she could respond, her father, Mr. Benson, came out and stood beside her. "This time," he said firmly, "you will explain everything, slowly, carefully, because you are not going to hurt my daughter again." Daniel lowered his head. "I deserve that and more." Clara sighed and looked him straight in the eye. "This is no longer just about me. It's about my son." Daniel nodded. "I want to know him. I want to know you again, if you will let me." Clara allowed Daniel to stay the night in the guest room. They barely spoke. She couldn't forget how easily he abandoned her and their son. But seeing him broken, no pride, no excuses, stirred something in her. Daniel made breakfast the next morning. Nathan stared at him curiously. "Is he my uncle?" the boy asked innocently. Clara took a deep breath. "No, sweetheart, that's your father." Daniel looked up, eyes teary. Nathan stared at him, confused but quiet. Later, Daniel sat Clara down. "Clara, I know sorry is cheap, but I've come to make things right. I will accept whatever judgment you give me." Clara nodded, then start by being a father to Nathan, not just a visitor. Back in Lagos, Evelyn's world was unraveling. Her friends stopped calling. The wealthy families she once boasted to avoided her. Her health began to fail. Mild strokes, persistent headaches, loneliness. Worse, she heard whispers in the neighborhood how her daughter-in-law, whom she once chased away, had become a rising star in the fashion industry. Her own son now lived in shame, abandoned by the woman Evelyn brought into his life. Evelyn tried calling Daniel, but he no longer picked her calls. One evening, Evelyn sat alone in her sitting room crying. "I only wanted the best for him." But deep down, she knew it was never about Daniel. It was about her pride. Daniel returned to Ibadan weekly. He helped Nathan with his homework, took him to the park, and joined Clara at fashion expos. Gradually, he earned their trust, not through words, but actions. Still, Clara kept her boundaries. "I forgive you, Daniel, but forgiveness doesn't mean we'll automatically become husband and wife again." Daniel agreed. "Whatever time gives me, I will use it to prove I've changed." Mr. Benson, observing Daniel's efforts, began softening towards him. One afternoon, he said to Clara, "Sometimes God breaks men so they understand the value of what they once ignored." Clara came home one day to find Evelyn at the gate leaning on a walking stick, weak and older than she remembered. "Please, I know I don't deserve to see you," Evelyn said, her voice cracking, "but I want to meet my grandson before it's too late." Clara hesitated, heart torn between anger and compassion. Eventually, she let Evelyn in. The first meeting between Evelyn and Nathan was tense. Nathan hid behind Clara at first, but Evelyn knelt before him and said, "I am your grandmother, and I've done very bad things to your mommy. Will you forgive me?" Nathan looked at Clara. Clara nodded gently. The boy gave Evelyn a hug. And for the first time in years, Evelyn wept sincerely. Evelyn moved in with Daniel temporarily for medical care. She no longer had servants or riches, just regrets. Clara continued growing her fashion empire and even opened a boutique in Lekki. Daniel supported her fully, handling logistics and accounts. They worked as a team again, but with clear boundaries. Eventually, Evelyn asked to see Clara privately. "I have wronged you, Clara. I called you names. I chased you out like a dog. But now I see the woman you are, and I see the mother you've become. You saved my son and my grandson. Thank you." Clara nodded. "I forgive you, but more importantly, I want peace for Nathan's sake." On Nathan's 80th birthday, after a beautiful family celebration, Daniel pulled Clara aside. "I've watched you grow. I've watched you forgive. You're the strongest woman I know." He knelt with a simple ring. "Clara Benson, will you marry me again?" Clara looked around at her son, her father, Evelyn, and her life. "I'm not the same woman who said yes the first time," she said softly. "This time, I choose you with wisdom and caution." She smiled. "Yes." Nathan jumped and clapped. "Mommy and Daddy are getting married." Evelyn sobbed quietly in the background, clutching her chest, this time from joy. The second wedding was small and deeply emotional. Mr. Benson gave Clara's hand with a speech. "This is not just a wedding, this is a story of grace." Evelyn was wheeled in but insisted on speaking. "I once tore this union apart with my own hands, but God allowed me to live to see it restored. I bless this marriage not out of duty, but from a changed heart." The guests clapped. Clara and Daniel held hands and sealed their union with tears and renewed vows. Evelyn's health declined further. One evening, she called Daniel and Clara. "My time is near," she said, "but I want to spend my last days surrounded by the peace I once destroyed." She asked to be buried in the family compound and made Clara the executor of her estate. "I couldn't carry love into old age, but I hope you too carry it for generations." Weeks later, Evelyn passed peacefully. At her burial, Daniel gave a touching eulogy. "My mother was not perfect, but she taught us, in her final moments, the power of repentance." Years passed. Nathan grew into a brilliant teenager. Clara's fashion empire became international. Daniel opened a logistics company and mentored young men who had lost direction. Clara often told women her story at empowerment seminars, reminding them of their worth, resilience, and strength. One day, Nathan asked, "Mommy, is it true Grandma was wicked?" Clara smiled. She was lost, but she found her way back before it was too late. That's what matters. Moral lessons. My evil mother-in-law ends, not in tragedy, but in transformation. Moral lessons. Pride destroys, humility restores. Evelyn's pride blinded her, but her humility opened the door to healing. True love is tested in the fire. Clara and Daniel's love was broken, but through pain it was refined. Forgiveness is not weakness. Clara's strength came not from revenge, but from rising above bitterness. People can change. Evelyn changed. Daniel changed. Change is possible when the heart is willing. Never underestimate the power of a good woman. Clara's resilience, wisdom, and quiet strength became the anchor of the Johnson family.